Aelara stood on the crimson fields of Virelon, her breathing shallow as the sky burned with the smoke of war. Once, her people were known as the Star-born Warriors, guardians of the galaxy's harmony. But now all that remained were broken walls, shattered dreams, and the dying echoes of their courage. Her spear, carved from the crystal roots of her homeland, was the last symbol of her clan's honor. It had never failed her, until today. Surrounded by the Draith horde, towering creatures of iron and ash, she felt the ground tremble beneath their march. Their leader, cloaked in shadows, pointed toward her with a cruel smile. "The last of the Virelon falls today," he hissed. Aelara gripped her spear tighter, whispering the ancient vow of her ancestors, but as she swung to block an incoming strike, the weapon snapped in two. The sound echoed like a death knell. She fell to one knee, clutching the broken shaft, staring at her reflection in the cracked crystal tip. Around her, her warriors were scattered, their courage fading like the dying light of their twin suns. The enemy laughed, mocking her weakness. The once golden banners of Virelon lay in the dust, torn and stained. Aelara's heart pounded as she raised her eyes to the heavens, her vision blurred by sweat and smoke. "Ancestors, if you can hear me, let me fall with honor," she whispered, closing her eyes as the enemy closed in. The air grew still for a moment, then trembled with a strange sound, like thunder tearing through the atmosphere. The Draith stopped mid-step, glancing upward in confusion. Aelara opened her eyes and saw a streak of light cutting through the clouds, blazing like a falling star. The ground shook as the light slammed into the battlefield, sending a shockwave of dust and energy through the air. The Draith stumbled back, shielding their eyes. Aelara felt her heart skip a beat. The crater smoked, glowing faintly blue, and from its center, a figure emerged, tall, human, and wrapped in strange armor that reflected the sun like molten silver. His steps were steady, deliberate, his face hidden behind a cracked visor that shimmered faintly in the dying light. For a moment, the battlefield forgot its war. Even the Draith stood silent, watching this mysterious being walk through the haze. The man's voice broke the stillness. It was calm, almost casual. "Mind if I join the fight?" he said, his tone carrying both confidence and warmth. Aelara stared in disbelief. A human? Here? She had heard ancient stories of humanity, wanderers from a distant blue world, long gone from this part of the galaxy. Yet there he stood, like a legend stepping out of myth. He turned slightly, his eyes meeting hers through the cracked visor. "You look like you could use a hand," he added with a faint smile. Aelara's instincts screamed that this was impossible, but her spirit, broken moments ago, flickered back to life. Without a word, she reached for his hand as he extended it toward her. The moment their hands touched, a strange calm washed over her. Something about this human carried an energy she couldn't describe, a determination that burned brighter than any weapon. The Draith roared, breaking the silence, ready to strike again, but the man stepped forward, raising a device on his wrist. A shimmering wave of blue energy pulsed outward, forming a barrier between them and the enemy. The alien warriors stumbled, their weapons shorting out. Aelara gasped as the field expanded, protecting the last of her fallen comrades. The human's armor glowed faintly, its energy fading but holding firm. "Not bad for a crash landing," he muttered under his breath. Aelara could only stare, her fear replaced by awe. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt something powerful. Hope. The light around them dimmed as the human lowered his hand. "You fight with heart," he said softly. "That's something worth saving." Aelara didn't understand his words fully, but she felt their meaning. As the enemy regrouped beyond the energy barrier, she looked at him and said, "Who are you?" The human tilted his head slightly, as if the question amused him. "Just a man who doesn't like bullies," he replied, his eyes scanning the horizon where new threats gathered. The twin suns dipped lower, casting long shadows across the field, and for the first time in days, Aelara stood tall. Her broken spear still glowed faintly in her hand, reflecting the light of the fallen star. Somewhere deep inside, she knew this man had not arrived by chance. The war for Virelon was far from over. But as the human turned toward the enemy with a quiet grin, Aelara whispered to herself, "Maybe the stars did hear me after all." The wind carried her words away, and in that moment, under the fading light of two suns, hope was reborn. The sun rose weakly over the scarred plains of Virelon, its light struggling to pierce through the dust that hung like a ghost over the battlefield. Aelara stood beside the strange human, still trying to make sense of his sudden arrival. His armor, though battered and scorched, shimmered faintly in the morning light, and every motion he made seemed precise, deliberate. The others, her surviving warriors, watched from a distance, whispering among themselves in disbelief. They had all seen him fall from the sky like a star, yet he moved with calm purpose, as if this war-torn world was just another stop in a long journey. The man finally turned toward her and said, "Name's Reed, Captain Reed of the Terran Expeditionary Corps, or at least what's left of it." His words carried a tone of weariness and quiet confidence. Aelara had never heard of such a corps, but the way he spoke made her believe it was once something great. "You are far from home, Captain," she said softly. Reed smiled faintly. "Seems to be a habit of ours." They both turned as the sound of distant thunder rolled across the horizon. The Draith were regrouping. Huge transports loomed in the distance, their silhouettes crawling forward like metal beasts. "They'll be back," Aelara murmured. "They never stop." Reed nodded, pulling a small device from his belt. With a low hum, a holographic map flickered to life in the air, showing the battlefield and the enemy movements. "They're expecting a retreat," he said, studying it closely. "That's what we'll use against them." Aelara frowned. "Retreat? We have nothing left to retreat with." Reed's smile widened just slightly. "That's the point. Let them think they've already won." His plan was unlike anything Aelara had seen. He spoke of misdirection, energy pulses, and magnetic interference, things her people barely understood. Yet when he explained it, it sounded simple, logical, almost beautiful in its precision. Within hours, they worked side by side, setting up the traps with scavenged parts from Reed's crashed ship and remnants of alien tech. Her soldiers followed his commands reluctantly at first, but the human's composure gave them confidence. When he spoke, there was no hesitation, no doubt, only quiet assurance. As the day faded, the first wave of the Draith descended on them, their roars echoing across the broken hills. Aelara's people braced themselves, but Reed raised his hand, signaling silence. He activated the device strapped to his wrist. In an instant, the air shimmered, and illusions of retreating troops appeared across the field, flickering in and out like ghosts. The Draith, believing victory was near, charged straight into the traps. Energy bursts flared, not deadly, but blinding and disorienting. Their machines stalled, their formations broke, and confusion spread like wildfire. Aelara watched in astonishment as the enemy stumbled into chaos, outmatched not by strength, but by cleverness. "How?" she whispered. Reed's voice was calm. "Sometimes you don't need to fight harder. You just have to fight smarter." The tide turned. Her soldiers, emboldened, struck back with renewed spirit, driving the Draith off the field. By nightfall, the ground was theirs again. The campfire flickered quietly as Aelara sat beside Reed, the stars above reflecting in his visor. "Why help us?" she finally asked. Reed stared into the flames for a long moment before answering. "Because when I crashed here, I saw something I hadn't seen in a long time," he said softly. people still fighting for something bigger than themselves. His gaze lifted to the twin moons overhead. Back home, we used to believe that courage was the only thing that could outshine the dark. Looks like your people believe the same. Aelara felt something stir within her chest. Respect, perhaps even trust. She had fought beside many warriors, but none quite like this human who carried both power and humility in equal measure. Yet even as the fire burned warmly between them, the sky to the north flickered with strange red lights. Reed noticed it first, his expression tightening. "They're moving their command ship," he said grimly. "They know I'm here." Aelara turned to him sharply. "You mean they came for you?" Reed's silence was the only answer she needed. Far above, a dark shape moved across the stars, vast and ominous. The next battle, she knew, would decide everything. But this time, she wasn't afraid. She looked at the human beside her and whispered, "Then we'll face them together." Reed nodded, standing slowly as the distant thunder began again. "Together," he said, his voice steady, his eyes fixed on the coming storm. The next dawn came red and silent, the kind of silence that always meant the storm was near. The Draith command ship loomed like a mountain in the sky, its shadow stretching for miles across the ruined plains of Virelon. Aelara stood beside Captain Reed at the edge of the last stronghold, watching its engines burn through the clouds. Around them, her warriors prepared in grim silence, repairing what little armor and weapons they had left. The air smelled of smoke and metal, but beneath it all was something new: hope. Reed's expression was unreadable as he tapped commands into a wrist console connected to a cracked data pad. "Their ship is broadcasting on every frequency," he muttered. "They're calling for my surrender." Aelara looked at him, her voice steady. "And will you?" Reed glanced up, his lips curling into the faintest smile. "Not today." He turned the device so she could see. A small holographic image showed his crashed vessel, the remains of his ship hidden beneath the cliffs. "There's still enough power in its core to create a surge. If we overload it, we can knock out their systems without harming anyone. But once it starts, there's no turning it off." Aelara's heart tightened. "You mean it will destroy the ship? And you with it?" Reed didn't answer immediately. He looked at her then, and she saw in his eyes something ancient and fierce, the quiet courage of a man who had already made peace with fate. "Someone has to stay and trigger it manually," he said simply. "If this works, your people will have a future." Aelara shook her head, stepping closer. "Then we'll do it together." But Reed placed a hand on her shoulder, firm yet gentle. "You're their leader, Aelara. They need you alive." She wanted to argue, but the sincerity in his tone stopped her. There was no pride, no ego, only conviction. The sky roared suddenly as the Draith descended, their ships pouring fire through the atmosphere. The ground quaked as energy blasts struck the plains. Aelara's soldiers scattered to their positions while Reed ran toward the cliffs, his armor gleaming faintly in the chaos. "Cover him!" she shouted, rallying her warriors. Arrows of plasma and bursts of light filled the air. Reed reached the wreck of his ship, smoke rising from its broken hull. He tore open a panel and began working with shaking hands, rerouting energy conduits as sparks flew. The air around him hummed with power. The core began to glow brighter, pulsating with blue light. "Reed!" Aelara's voice echoed through his calm. "The Draith are closing in." He smiled faintly. "Just a little longer." The ground split as the command ship's shadow fell over him. The Draith leader's voice thundered across the battlefield. "Human, you cannot stop what is coming." Reed looked up at the sky, unflinching. "Watch me," he whispered, pressing the final sequence. The light exploded outward, a wave of blinding energy sweeping across the land. The Draith ships faltered mid-air, their weapons shutting down. The great command ship flickered, its engines dying one by one. The sound of their collapse was like thunder fading into silence. When the light dimmed, the sky was clear again. Aelara stood among her people, her broken spear still glowing faintly with the residue of human energy. "Reed?" she whispered into the calm, but there was only static. The wind moved softly across the plains, carrying with it the scent of ozone and something else. Peace. Days later, the war ended. The Draith retreated beyond the stars, their ships powerless and their spirit broken. The people of Virelon began to rebuild. At the heart of the new city, they placed Aelara's broken spear, its tip infused with the crystal remains of Reed's ship. It shone with a gentle blue light, a symbol of unity between worlds. Every night, Aelara would look to the stars, where a faint glimmer still streaked across the darkness. Some said it was debris, others believed it was him, watching still. She chose to believe the latter. Standing before the monument, she whispered, "The stars heard me, and they sent a human." Above her, the twin suns rose together, lighting the world anew. Humanity had come and gone, but its legacy remained, a single act of courage that reminded an entire world that hope is never lost, even when the spear breaks and the sky falls silent. Hope is never lost, even when the spear breaks and the sky falls silent. Gives it a cinematic and satisfying closure.